When most people talk about survival shelters, they think of something visible, a wooden lean-to, a tarp tent, or a log structure built above ground. The problem with that mindset is simple. Those designs waste energy and bleed heat faster than you can make it. In cold or wet conditions, an above-ground shelter can lose up to 60% of its heat to air movement and exposed surfaces. That's not theory, that's physics. The same lesson that early Arctic explorers, World War II partisans, and ancient nomads learned the hard way still applies today. If you want to survive cold conditions with minimal fuel, you must work with the ground, not against it. The real secret of thermal survival isn't in fancy materials, it's in proper earth insulation. Let's get into the science and the practical construction steps behind subsurface shelters that trap heat, hide your presence, and require almost no ongoing energy. Above-ground shelters fail because they fight natural thermodynamics. In cold environments, heat loss happens through conduction, convection, and radiation. An above-ground structure has all three working against it. Cold air circulates around every surface, pulling warmth away faster than it can be generated. Even with thick walls or insulation layers, the structure's surface area is exposed to constant cooling. Once interior air drops below body temperature, moisture from breath condenses, making everything damp and miserable. Ground temperature, however, stays remarkably stable. Just 1 to 2 feet below the surface, even during freezing nights, the Earth remains between 50 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit in many climates. That stability creates a natural thermal buffer, an energy reserve that modern survivalists often ignore. During the Second World War, resistance fighters over in Eastern Europe survived those brutal winters not in cabins or tents, but in dugouts reinforced with logs, clay, and sod. These underground shelters, stayed warm with just a small fire or even the collective body heat of their occupants. When you dig even a shallow depression shelter, you're actually tapping into the Earth's ability to store and slowly release heat. The surrounding soil, it absorbs warmth from the day and then releases it gradually through the night. This effect, combined with reduced air circulation, means that a subsurface shelter needs only a fraction of the energy to stay habitable, compared to a structure sitting on top of frozen ground. To apply this principle today, dig your shelter at least 2 feet below the natural ground line. The ideal size for one person is roughly 3 feet wide by 6 feet long, with a depth of about 2 feet. This small cavity reduces air volume, which is crucial because the less air you need to heat, the longer warmth stays trapped. Use the removed soil to build a berm around the edge, creating a natural windbreak. If possible, angle the entrance downward to prevent cold air from flowing directly inside. The biggest heat leak in most makeshift shelters is, the roof. Thin tarps or planks, they just let warmth radiate out immediately. Historical underground shelters often used a combination of log rafters, leaf litter, and sod to create a thick, insulating barrier. The same principle applies now. Lay branches or poles across the trench, cover them with a thick layer of leaves, grass or straw, and then pile about 6 inches of soil on top. This creates a natural barrier that blocks Winslow's heat loss and adds camouflage. If you're building in a forested area, it's best to aim for at least 1 inch of dry vegetation between each layer, as this helps trap insulating air pockets. You should also avoid using wet materials directly over the living area because, well, they can freeze and compress, which is definitely not what you want. Modern preppers, can actually replicate this by using canvas tarps beneath the soil layer. This gives you some added waterproofing, while still maintaining a bit of breathability. Another major flaw in most survival shelter designs is, honestly, over-ventilation. Folks often create large openings for smoke or airflow, but that just lets precious heat escape, which can really make things tough. Now, the correct way to vent a small subsurface shelter is with a narrow air shaft, ideally just about 2 inches wide, and it should be positioned opposite the fire source. During the Second World War, partisans would use narrow reed tubes or angled vents made from bark, to let smoke escape slowly without losing much warmth. If you're using a small fire pit, dig it just slightly below floor level near the entrance. The cooler air at the bottom draws smoke upward through the vent, while the warm air stays trapped in the living zone. Lining the interior walls with clay, mud, or even wet leaves, helps absorb and radiate heat evenly, rather than just letting it escape directly. A poorly drained shelter, it quickly becomes a cold swamp. Moisture build-up leads to hypothermia faster than wind exposure, believe it or not. Always grade the shelter floor just slightly downward toward a small drain trench, or maybe a sump hole. Fill this area with gravel ash or sand to help absorb any excess water. In wetter regions, it's best to use bark straw or even discarded clothing as a floor layer. This helps keep your sleeping areas elevated and dry, which is honestly a real lifesaver out there. Back during the Second World War, field engineers discovered that putting a thin layer of dry ash beneath bedrolls not only absorbed moisture, but also deterred insects. It's an old trick, but one that modern survivalists can still apply quite easily. Once the shelter is enclosed, it's important to focus on minimizing the air volume inside. A smaller space heats up faster and, it retains warmth for much longer. In military field tests, a 2-person dugout just large enough to sit upright reached 68 degrees Fahrenheit inside, while the outside temperature dropped below freezing, powered only by a candle and body heat. Adding reflective surfaces, even tin foil or an emergency blanket lining one wall, can, redirect radiant warmth back toward the living zone. If you plan to stay longer than a night, build a small side alcove for your heat source or candle, separated by a partial wall of earth. Underground shelters are not just about warmth. They offer concealment and endurance. Above-ground structures are visible, noisy, and prone to wind damage. Subsurface shelters, on the other hand, blend into the landscape and require less ongoing maintenance. They also muffle sound, reduce scent dispersion, and make you less visible to both animals and people. It's quite fascinating how they work, isn't it? This is exactly why World War II scouts, resistance groups, and even modern Arctic expeditions rely on variations of this design. It's a tried-and-true method, really, that has stood the test of time. For long-term use, reinforce the roof with thicker poles and replace loose soil periodically. A small vented fire every few hours maintains warmth without smoke build-up. It's all about keeping things sustainable and cozy, you know? If frost begins to penetrate, add fresh organic matter like leaves or straw on the floor. As it decomposes slowly, it releases heat and carbon dioxide, adding to insulation. The biggest mistake survivalists make is overbuilding what doesn't need to be built. Survival isn't about comfort, it's about efficiency. Every calorie of energy counts, and losing 60% of your heat to thin air is a waste you can't afford. The ground is nature's best shelter, silent, stable, and thermally balanced. Learn to use it, and you can stay warm in conditions that would drive others to exhaustion. If this guide gave you a new perspective on shelter design and survival efficiency, make sure to share it with others who still think warmth comes from bigger fires and thicker walls. Subscribe to In the Beginning for more in-depth historical survival methods, engineering insights from the past, and the lessons that still keep humans alive when the world outside turns hostile.